Welcome back. I'm Dr. Gila, and this is Thanksgiving week in the US. I want to start by acknowledging that the history commemorated by this holiday is highly problematic and fraught. And also that celebrating the holiday with family can sometimes be stressful and fraught in other ways. The other thing that Thanksgiving is known for is an association with gratitude. And so I thought this week I would take the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts on gratitude and gratitude practices. I'll be sharing with you why gratitude can be a really beautiful and supportive and powerful practice. I'm also going to share with you some pitfalls and risks that can come up around gratitude practices and some nuances and alternatives in case those are helpful. And then I'll share some practical ideas of things that you can try for yourself or with your kids. I hope it's helpful. Let's dive in. Welcome to Single Parenting with Connection, Not Perfection, the podcast that honors your messy reality. It's the support you crave without the usual emotional landmines. I'm your host, Dr. Gila, and I promise I will never tell you to just tag your partner in. Before we start, quick reminder. While I am a licensed psychologist and a certified coach, this podcast is not coaching and it's not therapy, and it's not a replacement for medical or psychological advice. It is for educational and informational purposes only. All right, let's dive in. Gratitude. Now, the short answer to whether there is any merit to having a gratitude practice is yes. I think there is merit. In this case, I think it's a yes, but I'm usually a yes and kind of gal. Today, I'm going to go with a yes, but. But let's start with the yes. So, our brains have what's called a negativity bias. It's much easier for us to pay attention to, notice things that are challenging, negative, hard. And in a way, our brains kind of put a spotlight on that. And that's, for a normal, typical state of mind. If you are especially depressed or anxious or stressed or whatever it may be, your brain may have an even more powerful negativity bias. And what tends to happen is we see challenging things and say, aha, see, this is evidence for this really challenging belief that I have. Like, I am a failure, I'm not good enough, right? It's easy for us to see things that are evidence for that. Whereas we kind of skate past, dismiss, overlook things that are evidence against it. It's harder to see them. And even if you're not clinically depressed or anxious or anything like that, again, there is this negativity bias that our brains have. If you think about, like in a theater on a stage, if we put a spotlight on something that's on the stage, let's say there's a beautiful tree on the stage and we put a spotlight on that tree. The things that are right on the other side of the spotlight, right around the perimeter of the spotlight, are actually going to be even harder to see than if the spotlight wasn't there and the stage was dark. So there is this effect, and I think this tends to happen with this negativity bias also, that if we are putting a spotlight on and really focusing on the negative, the hard stuff, that sometimes the adjacent positive stuff is harder. It's harder to see. And by the way, I'm using negative and positive here. I don't love those terms. When it comes to feelings, I never call them negative feelings. I like to call them prickly feelings or hard feelings sometimes. I don't like negative and positive. In terms of just sort of like noticing things around us, I guess I'm calling them hard or negative or positive, but I just want to say those are imperfect words. So we're just going to put it there for now. Okay, so our brains have this negativity bias, and this can be more pronounced in certain situations based on your upbringing, your cultural influences, your emotional state of mind, all these things. So I think there is merit to really being intentional about putting gratitude, and I'm going to actually step back from gratitude for a minute here, some positivity, to use that imperfect word, to really be more intentional about noticing things that are glimmers of positivity and that we feel grateful for. That when you think about it, if there is something that you see as positive, right, to find a way to appreciate and feel grateful for that. And it is true that sometimes these things take practice. They take intentionality and practice. And the more you practice it, the more it becomes automated. So you're sort of training your brain to notice these things that otherwise your brain might just sort of skip past. So, in a way, gratitude practices can help us widen that spotlight beam so that it encompasses other things as well. Or maybe a better way to put it is it creates a new beam somewhere else on the stage and might even help take the original beam, that negativity spotlight, and there's less space for it, less room for it, less attention to it. And so it might be eventually less bright. It does not erase the hard stuff. It just makes it a little more balanced. Now, having said all that, I do think there are some potential pitfalls, dangers, risks of gratitude practices. And one big one is that if we, for ourselves or for our kids, right? So we can have a gratitude practice on our own for our own stuff. And we can have gratitude practices that we do with our kids to sort of help train their brains to see these glimmers and to feel that gratitude. So, one of the downsides is that if we are only focusing on and prompting for gratitude, it can be sort of this toxic positivity vibe. It can send the message that the hard stuff, the prickly stuff, is not as welcome. And we want to make sure that we are creating space and permission for the prickly, hard stuff, both for ourselves and also for our kids. I often talk about this visual that I like to use, which is those foam pool noodles, the long piece of foam. And if you sit on that pool noodle, the noodle will stay underwater and you will, in fact, stay afloat in the pool. But as soon as life throws you a little bit off balance, that pool noodle comes exploding out of the water, right? It doesn't just gently float to the surface. It explodes out of the water with the energy and intensity that it has had pent up. And this is, I think, what tends to happen when we don't create space and permission and opportunities to name and feel and acknowledge the prickly feelings, the hard things in life. We try to push them down, hold them below the surface of the water, and then something throws us off and it comes exploding out. So I really do think that it is very valuable to be intentional and build in opportunities, spaces, and ways of feeling the hard feelings, expressing and naming and seeking support for the hard and the prickly stuff. So we don't want our kids to think that we only want to hear things that they're grateful for. And we don't want our own brains to think that those are the only valid and worthy feelings and thoughts. Right. So if you've been feeling critical of yourself, that you are not always grateful all the time, I hereby give you permission to drop that guilt if you can. I know that's easier said than done. And know that gratitude is not the only feeling or thought or experience that matters, and that the other stuff is important too. The other thing I want to mention is that, when I talk about these broader, like negative, positive experiences or evaluations of things, I guess really that's what it is, an evaluation of something. Gratitude sometimes might be hard to access authentically. And it might be a complicated concept to really understand, certainly for our kids and even for our own grown up brains. It can be a hard one. And I think it's important to note that it is not the only way to achieve the thing that I think gratitude practices are trying to achieve. So, there are some other words that I want to bring in here that I think have just as much value and each are beautiful in their own right. One of them is awe. So, awe, I think of as being in wonderment of something, really like feeling the experience of it and appreciating it. And this can be easier to access. It's a little bit different than gratitude. So, for example, I have a client who started shifting to working on, can you notice things that you have done during the day that you are sort of in awe of your accomplishments, or noticing things in your surroundings that you are in awe of? They sort of take your breath away, even if it's in just a momentary, like mild way. But really tapping into this awe element. It was harder for her to find gratitude for especially things that she accomplished or that she did. It was hard for her to find that. But when we shifted the language to awe, it actually helped her. I think awe may be earlier in the process than gratitude. Like, you might not really be able to think of something that you're grateful for, but you can look around you and look inside you and notice something that is beautiful in some way, whether that's visually beautiful or functionally beautiful, energetically beautiful, something that you are in awe of. The other one is delight. If you have ever had the experience of walking into a room and someone sees you and is so excited to see you, right? Or someone is just looking at you with this element of delight. They are enjoying being in your presence, not because you're doing anything, you're not accomplishing something. They are simply delighting in your presence. And this is what we try to do in special time with our kids. I'm going to be doing an episode on special time soon, relatively soon. But this is the energy that I think can be so nurturing and nourishing and easier to access. Again, you don't have to find something that you are really impressed with or that the person has accomplished that to be proud of. You don't have to access the gratitude piece of it. Although I think with both awe and delight, the next step from them might be gratitude. So you might be grateful for whatever it is that you are delighting in, or whatever it is that is bringing you a sense of awe. So those are a couple of other really, I think, beautiful ways of looking at the world or at any given moment that do a similar thing, but a slightly different, a nuanced, different thing than gratitude. They are all overlapping, I think, and they are certainly related, but they are all a little bit different. So if gratitude feels hard to access for you or for your child, or if it feels uncomfortable in some way, then maybe experimenting with shifting to awe or delight, or maybe trying to do all three, right? I find that as I say the word delight, I just like instinctively smile. It's like you can't think of being delighted by something without smiling. And that little sort of involuntary almost moment of joy, of delight is so beautiful. So I want to now talk about a few practical ways, some concrete ways that you can practice this with your kids and with yourself. So one thing you might have heard of in the past is rose, thorn, bud. And this is the idea that the rose is something that you are grateful for or in awe of or delighting in, something positive in general. And the thorn is something prickly, right? Something that might have been hard, might have been challenging, might have been difficult in an emotional way, something that you maybe wish hadn't happened, that sort of thing. And then the bud is something that you're looking forward to. And I have learned through the years that sometimes, especially at the beginning of doing this practice, if you find that you or your kid, it is that you're doing it with, has a much bigger spotlight on the hard things, the negative things, it might be useful to actually start with the thorn. Because if the thorn is already top of mind, it can be hard to access the roses, to notice the roses until you have sort of named the thorns, so to speak. And once we name the thorns, now we can set that aside and really appreciate, delight in the roses. This, I think, could shift over time because as you train your brain to notice the roses and to appreciate the roses, those might come more easily. Also, there doesn't have to be a thorn in your day, but we can always find some rose in our day. It doesn't have to be anything major. It can be something really small. It can be how soft our pillow is in the morning, right? It can be having a moment to connect and talk about your roses. It can be the yummy mac and cheese at dinner, right? It can be little tiny things. It can be having a warm house in the winter, right? So, really training the spotlight to notice there's a lot of things in our day that we really take for granted and recognizing that we are fortunate and appreciative and grateful to have. Another idea that can be especially good with younger kids or maybe kids who are resistant to a longer practice like rose, thorn, bud, which doesn't have to be particularly long, but still it might be too much for any kid, or it might feel like too much of a demand. By the way, any of this might feel, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Another thing is simply, what was the favorite part of your day? I have an interview with Mia Wazinski from Playful Heart Parenting that I'm going to be airing very soon, possibly next week, actually. I'm not positive, but very soon it's coming your way. And she talks in there about this practice she does with her kids, where at the end of the day, each person in the family, including adults, name the favorite part of their day. And what she has noticed is that now, often during the day, when something happens, someone will say, "Ooh, that was the favorite part of my day." And it shows how these practices do really train your brain to look for these things, right? To notice these things in your day to day. Another option is rate your day 0 to 10, and then you can name what was the highest it got and what was the lowest it got, and you could talk about that. So there's lots of different ways that you can weave in and train your brain and your kid's brain to notice things. And maybe for you, it's not even gratitude that you want them to start noticing, or favorites. Maybe it's a time in their day where they smiled, where they laughed, right? Whatever it is that you want to shine that spotlight on or make the spotlight a little bit brighter, this is a great practice to do. And then I also want to name that for some people, some kids and some adults, any of these practices is not going to feel comfortable. It might feel like a demand. I know I have a lot of people in the audience who have kids who are demand avoidant. Maybe they have PDA or simply demand avoidant, and maybe you are demand avoidant. And it might be hard to engage in these kinds of practices to train your brain. Your brain might have this sort of reaction of, well, I don't want you to train me. I hate this resistance might be coming up. And that's okay, right? We want to honor that. And that's okay. One really beautiful, powerful thing that you can do, regardless of whether your child is resistant, but this can be especially powerful if you do have a child who doesn't enjoy these more formal practices, is modeling aloud. Modeling is our secret weapon as parents. Our kids are watching and listening, whether we like it or not. And sometimes that is kind of a crummy thing, But sometimes it's a really beautiful thing, and it can be an incredibly powerful tool in our toolkit. And when you model these things aloud, your kids may hear and they may start to do it eventually, maybe not immediately. They may start to do it eventually down the road. How we talk about our kids and about ourselves aloud in front of our kids and really about other people, these become sort of the template of our kids' internal narratives about themselves, about the world around them, about other people. And so this is really an opportunity to model and, in fact, teach our children to use various perspectives and language without doing it in a demanding way. The other thing is that, let's say you say a gratitude statement aloud. Worst case scenario, it doesn't affect your kid at all, but it's still a positive experience for you. And that's a pretty darn good worst case scenario, if you ask me. I have an example from my own life recently. My son had this idea for a riddle that he wanted to do for a classmate for their birthday. And he was working on it. I was cooking dinner. And I suddenly hear him say out loud, "I'm really proud of myself. This is coming out really well." And it was such a lovely moment because I have been working on saying aloud when I'm proud of myself. Now, I don't often say that I'm proud of other people. It's a little hard to articulate, but it feels a little patronizing and evaluative. But naming aloud when I've done something that I'm proud of is something that I've been experimenting with. For example, if I parallel parked and I did it in, not a lot of steps, there is something uniquely satisfying about doing a good job parallel parking. I don't know why, but it feels very gratifying. And so I remember recently I just did that and I said, "Oh, I did a really good job at that. Go me." Or maybe I said, "Oh, I'm really proud of myself. That was really good." I also have talked to him about this podcast that I launched this podcast, and it's been a lot of work. And I'm really proud of myself that I did it. It's a big project. It's a vulnerable and scary project in some ways. And I'm proud of myself that I am doing it. And so I have named that aloud. And so when I heard him say, "I'm really proud of myself," it just really warmed my heart. So if you've ever heard your kid say something that makes you cringe and like wonder where in the world did they hear that, you know that our kids are listening to us, they're listening to their teachers, to other kids at school, to, or other kids on the playground or wherever, to things that they're watching on TV. They are taking it all in, and everything that they hear, they're experimenting with saying themselves. It forms these templates of their own internal narrative and how they speak out loud. So let's use that to our advantage and really lean into that modeling piece. And in the process, support ourselves, or rather, let's lean into supporting ourselves in these beautiful ways. And in the process, we're modeling for our kids. The last thing that I just want to touch on is a few little reminders and tips for if you do try some sort of gratitude practice with your kids, or awe practice, or delight practice, or anything like that. And one is to let their answers be what they are. I know that you might have a sort of initial reaction, like maybe every single time you do this, they say that they're grateful for something really materialistic, right? Their Lego set, their toy truck, whatever it may be. Or maybe for video games, and you really wish that they weren't really into video games. And this might sort of stir up some feelings inside of you, which is understandable. And so my invitation and encouragement is to notice what's coming up for you, right? We don't want to just ignore it. You can notice it internally and sort of acknowledge it internally, but take that breath and see if you can really bring a non-judgmental, non-evaluative lens to whatever it is that they're sharing. And most of the time, they will start out, and maybe you as the adult also, will start out with more surface level things. And that's okay. And it may evolve over time. So bring that curious mindset, that sort of experimental lens. Let's do the experiment and see if we let be whatever it is comes up without criticism, without, I'm not going to say without judgment, because if there is that sort of involuntary internal judgment that comes up, right? Recognizing that and trying to set it on a shelf, maybe, and sit with whatever it is that comes up, really resisting the urge to comment in any sort of critical, judgmental, negative way. And that also holds true for the thorns. So when there are hard things that your kid is bringing to you, to try to let them be named and sort of receive them without immediately trying to reframe them into a positive or fix them or do a teachable moment, right? So to really focus on hearing, listening, and just receiving, holding space for whatever comes up. And the last thing is that, I think there is a difference between gratitude and being polite. So our culture tends to conflate the two, confuse the two, right? That to be grateful, it means saying thank you when someone gives you water. And I'm not saying that we need to toss manners out the window and it's not worth working on those. We can talk about that in another episode. I'm just saying that saying thank you is not the same as being grateful. And I personally, it is more important to me to cultivate a capacity for and practice of authentic gratitude than superficial politeness. That's my priority and my value. It doesn't have to be yours, but I just want to name that there is a difference, right? There is a difference. So is gratitude overrated? I would say no. Gratitude is not overrated, but forced gratitude is overrated. And I would also say that there are other positive lenses or evaluative lenses that I would put in a similar category as gratitude that might be more easy to access, like awe and delight, that are really beautiful and meaningful. So here's my invitation for you, which is sometime today, say out loud in front of your kids something that you are proud of, grateful for, in awe of, or delighted by about yourself. If you give it a try, I'd love to hear how it went. And one more thing, speaking of gratitude, I want to take a moment to really say how grateful I am for each and every one of you for being here, for supporting the podcast, and also for being such beautiful lights in your children's worlds. This is such profound and deep work, and I'm so grateful that there are so many parents out there who are wanting to parent in a more compassionate and connected way, and who are doing the work, which is often hard work, and showing up each and every day. Your kids are so lucky to have you by their sides, even if they can't always recognize or articulate that. I am grateful for it and grateful for you being here. And if you have been enjoying the podcast, I would be so grateful if you would share it with other single parents or parents who aren't single who might benefit as well. And if you would leave a rating or a review, it really means so much to me and really helps the podcast get out there into this world. No pressure whatsoever, but if you do feel inspired and motivated to do so, I'm so grateful for that. Either way, I am in awe of all that you're doing as parents in this world. I am delighted that you are here sharing this space with me each week, and I am so grateful to have you here. All right. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving, I hope it's a safe one and a delicious one and a connection-filled one without a lot of drama. And I'll see you next week. That's it for this episode. I am so glad you found your way here. And remember, even if you're on your own, you don't have to do it alone. You've got this.